Boy, I don't know what to say about this video other than this is going to be some real time traveling. Let's get into it. Back in 2017, I began a full restoration of my 96 Bayliner by tearing it apart all the way down to the hull. From there, I began the rebuilding process, which included learning to fiberglass, rebuilding an engine and outdrive, learning to fair and paint, and even upholstery. Now, I've bought a 28-foot cabin cruiser, and I'm starting all over. Welcome, my name's Jared. Now get ready, because it's going to be a ship show. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Jared, and in this episode, we are going to be, as mentioned, traveling back in time about 2 years because we are going to be replacing the bearing carrier for the outdrive in this episode, and I actually started that project quite a while ago. It's actually almost one of the first things I did on this boat. I'd never wrapped it up because that turned into reconditioning the drive, repainting it, replacing some other stuff, so that kind of got put on hold as to being able to completely finish it because the drive had to be back on the boat in order for me to torque down the bearing carrier to the right spec. So now that the drive is officially on, we need to go back and do that. So I'm going to go back and show you the original footage of me removing it, and we will pick back up with the final installation on the boat. Let's get into it. Alright guys, it's been a little bit since the last video where we took a look at the Bravo drive, so let's kind of reassess where we're at right now. I mean, to be honest, it looks pretty sweet, but whew, it's 600 bucks. It does come with the new seal installed and roller bearing, if you can see that in there, which is nice, so at least saves me the step of having to replace the seal and bearing or anything like that. So, alright, let's go take the tool outside. I have a feeling I'm going to be needing this, and let's see if we can get it. Alright, I got my tool here, just making sure it fits. This is a special bearing carrier removal tool. Got a breaker bar in it. From what I've read, I don't have a bunch of confidence that this is going to do anything, at least easily, just in case I got my heat up here. Oh, just for reference, this is reverse thread. I know how a screw works. That's kind of what I expected. So, when it comes to heating this, really what you're trying to get at is where these threads are. That's typically where it's bound up. So I'm gonna hold this here just for reference. So that's about where it sits. So right about here is where we're trying to heat. So I'm gonna get a pencil and mark that. All right, so one other thing I wanna try too is just giving it a light tap around the housing with a hammer, just see if I can break any of that corrosion loose. Obviously you don't wanna hit it too hard, it could crack the aluminum casing of the drive, which I don't wanna do, so about there, and don't need to be perfect here. Oops, that's not right. Right about there. Okay. But again, before I break out the heat, let's just give this a couple taps. So let's try a little bit of heat. You know, it never occurred to me before I started this that I never drained the drive lube. So, that's what we're doing now. Waiting on that, got the bottom screw out here. I started to take the top screw out and decided to leave it in while this drains a little bit because with the drive lube monitor inside the boat, this will actually feed oil down through that unless you clamp off the hose, but I'm just gonna let it all drain anyway. So after this drains a little while longer, I'll take that cap back out just to try and minimize it from running down the drive. But anyway, once that's done, then we'll go back to removing the bearing carrier. All right, so I got the bearing retainer off finally, or bearing carrier rather. It wasn't too bad. The heat, the heat was this ticket. It just took a while. So this is it. At first glance, I mean, you wouldn't think it was horrible, but obviously a lot of corrosion. The interior part of it looks to be in good shape, but the reason I decided to go about changing it in the first place is just there's so much of this seal exposed, so that makes me think that there's very little metal holding that in. So alright guys, we are back on this thing a few days later, working on the bearing carrier and getting the new one installed. But before I can do that, what I need to do is get this thing cleaned out. There's a bunch of gunk, sand, old grease stuff just stuck inside of there, so I want to make sure I get that cleaned out before I put on the new bearing carrier. Let's see if I can give you guys an idea of what I'm dealing with here. Looking inside of there, so there's all kinds of crap on the shaft, and what I don't want to do is go to screw in the new one and basically push all that junk back to the other side of where the O-ring seal is and basically put that inside the gear case. So I'm going to try and clean that stuff out of there as best I can before putting on the new bearing carrier. I contemplated buying the tool and taking off the bearing retainer nut that's in there, but I don't want to spend that money, to be honest with you. So I'm going to try and do this as best as I can and see how it goes. And if you haven't noticed till I just put the camera here, we are way up in the air, using the engine hoist to get the drive up in the air, so I'm kind of working at a comfortable level. When I had it on my cart, I was like bent over and the prop shaft is basically on the ground, so basically doing this to just kind of help myself out here. Alright, let's see what we're dealing with here. Alright, if you can see in there, it's actually looking pretty good. It's hard to tell because there's some corrosion in there and some like mud and stuff, or not mud, but just mostly some surface corrosion that I don't think I'm going to get off without like sanding and stuff, but I don't think it really is needed. But the surface that the bearing carrier threads onto and the surface that the O-ring seals on actually looks really good. So between scrubbing with the toothbrush and some brake cleaner in there, I think we're in good shape. A little bit of oil leaking down there at the bottom just because it's still tilted back, so that's just some extra drive lube leaking out. But if anything, it might be a good thing because it might push any extra debris out before I put the carrier on. So I think we're ready to get the carrier in there. All right guys, welcome back to 2026, where hair is longer, outdrives are cleaner, and boats have flipped 180 degrees. But it is time to reinstall the bearing carrier. Now for the Kenide and other videos, I've noticed that the bearing carrier was in there before, but the plan was always to remove it because I needed to torque it to spec once the drive was back on the boat, because there's really no good way for me to do that in the garage. And I actually missed a step in the sealant and lubricant sort of department. So got a fresh start and we're going to get that taken care of now. So let's go. Here is said brand new bearing carrier. A little bit less new looking now because I got some outdrive paint on there and a little bit of dirt, whatever. So I got this nice and cleaned up though. So the first step is we need to take some Quicksilver 24C grease, and we are going to first cut the tip off of this because apparently I've never used it. Now we are going to apply this to the threads and the O-ring just to help lubricate things going together. And if you don't do this, then your torque readings are going to be off because the torque values are based on those threads being lubricated. So I will spread that around there in a second, but I also am going to put some of this in between the seal surfaces. There's actually a double seal in there. So this shows up, I don't know, I'm going to take my finger and just kind of press it down in between the seals. I'm sure 50% of this will probably fling off into the water, but it's okay. I will say, try and avoid getting this grease into the roller bearing in there. This grease has Teflon in it. It's very slippery, and you would think grease and bearings is a good combination, but grease that has too low of a friction value will actually cause rollers in the bearings to slip instead of roll. And I believe Quicksilver or Mercury actually had a service bulletin about that years ago. So just be wary of that. Okay, that is good. Now I'm just going to spread it on the O-ring and threads. The next thing we need to do, which is actually what I forgot to do last time, is we are going to apply some Mercruiser Perfect Seal, aka Permatex Aviation Formagasket. And that is going to go on this slightly tapered surface here, because this is actually the surface that seals up against the flare on the outdrive. That is going to prevent, although I guess it doesn't matter if water gets in there, so I'm not really sure why you put it there. Maybe just prevent corrosion between that mating surface. So either way, I'm going to do it. Okay, that is a nice coat the whole way around on that angled surface. So at this point, we're ready to start installing. So obviously, if you forgot, this is reverse thread, so it's lefty-tighty in this case. So I'm gonna get this started by hand to make sure nothing's cross-threaded, tighten it down as much as I can, and then we will use the special tool to torque it down. All right, and just an FYI, this is, I actually don't have the Quicksilver, actually, one second. The tool is 91-805374-1. So that is the specific Mercruiser tool. I actually found this brand and I like them quite a bit. They're really well built. This is Marine Tech Tools. I think I got this on Amazon. It's MT0061, it looks like. So check this brand out. They have a lot of the specialized tools and they're a fraction of Mercruiser. And it's steel. It's not like crappy aluminum, so it's pretty well built. And it's nickel plated, so it's not going to rust, which is another nice thing. Okay, so the last step here is we need to torque the bearing carrier to the correct spec, which is 150 foot-pounds. But there's a trick here because this attachment point for your torque wrench is not all the way to the center here. So there's actually a conversion you have to do. And if we go back to, I believe it's at the beginning of the chapter. Okay, so here is our torque conversion chart for bearing carrier. So we need to measure the length of the torque wrench, which in my case is 17 inches. 17 inches, come over here. So that means we need to set the torque wrench to 124 foot-pounds, and that will be the equivalent of 150 foot-pounds with this tool. All right. I wonder if it doesn't work in reverse. This is like no foot-pounds. So. All right, so I guess I'm guessing. All right, guys. Well, that is going to do it for the bearing carrier installation replacement process. Sorry for the gigantic time lapse there. Anyways, I'm going to off camera try and locate a spring or whatever they call it, style torque wrench, bar style, whatever has like the lever on it. I was torquing that thing down and it's not clicking, and I knew it was a lot of force or a lot of torque on that thing. So I was like, okay, just keep going, and it was not clicking. Come to find out, my Harbor Freight torque wrench does not actually do the clicky thing in reverse. So it's probably too tight because I was like putting my body weight onto it. So we'll fix that off camera, but for all intents and purposes, the bearing carrier is in, which is awesome. I'm not gonna put the props on yet because if you can see that one back there, it is quite disgusting, as is the other one. So we're gonna get those cleaned up in the future here so we can get them on. But one thing I'm really excited about is now that the drive is on, in theory, we can now test the motor in the boat and look for leaks, refill all the fluids, all that kind of stuff. So I know we tested the motor in a previous video on the stand in the garage and everything looked good and worked in there, but it's always different in the boat because now we got hoses hooked up that weren't hooked up before. So again, just checking for leaks, all that kind of stuff. So that'll also be a huge milestone to get checked off. So yeah, I mean, that pretty much wraps up the last thing that needed to be done on the drive aside from putting the props back on, which is kind of crazy to think about. So all right, quick end of the video update. I was losing sleep over this because I found out my torque wrench doesn't work in reverse, which I need to for the bearing carrier. So I went on Amazon, bought a replacement torque wrench, came in, so I got it loosened. So let's retorque it to the right value, which is 150 pounds, foot-pounds, but based on the length of this torque wrench, 129 foot-pounds. I know, I'm anal, but now I can sleep, so let's go do it. All right, now I can sleep at night. Anyways, that's gonna do it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, leave a comment, all that fun stuff. And until next time, thanks for watching. You idiot, you still need to fill the drive with lube.